Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So, some significant things have happened in the world of politics, but let's start here in the liberal world of media. Um, this is the ladies on The View, and they're upset about something, as per usual, because they're usually kind of upset about something.
Mika Brzezinski has spent a long time warning about you-know-who poses a dangerous
You know who? The
threat to the
man,
future
the man who shall not be named.
of democracy. So this morning, they surprised a lot of viewers when they talked about how they spent the weekend. Take a look.
Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution
Yeah, we saw this before.
against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. For nearly 80 million Americans, election denialism, public trials, and January 6th were not as important as the
They weren't as important.
issues that moved them to send Donald Trump back to the White House with their vote.
You know, it's the whole idea that those things are real. I mean, when I showed you the clips of her saying it's their job to tell the American people what to think, and they're spinning, right? They're not spinning today because it was Joe Biden's. It was the first show after his disastrous debate. Let me just show you those memes right here quickly.
The dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts. And it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think. And that is our job. Okay. So as you can see, you won't see us spinning here on Morning Joe at all.
You know, they cling to these ideas that these things are factual when they're clearly something that's perceptive. Like you can call January 6th a bunch of dopes and Trump a dope who sent him up there and things got out of hand. You know, there's some evidence that they were invited in and let into the Capitol. That is whatever it is. But in terms of your view on it, you could call it a bunch of morons running around like frat boy type of stupidity. Or you could call it some violent insurrection, right? Like depending on how you want to grade the thing. You know, there's different levels of how you perceive that event. You know, was it a staged event? Was it contributed to by the other side? They certainly loved it. They can't stop talking about it. The Democrats and these shills for the Democratic Party. And so they were glad it happened. And so whatever you want to define it as, these guys were glad it happened because they can talk about it all the time. The Democrats and Biden were glad it happened because they could talk about it all the time. They used it as a weapon to deplatform people and push their agenda. So it was something they took advantage of, right? Don't let a good crisis go to waste. It was a crisis that they used to their ends. So any of these things that they're talking about can be debated about, how serious they were and the definition of them and how much was contributed to, how staged they were, the rest of it, right? And they're not getting the fact that America doesn't believe those stories. It isn't that they're saying that those things are facts. They're saying we don't trust the media's coverage of them. That's what's, the obvious understanding. But none of these people will admit to that. And so if there was a lesson to be learned, and there isn't, it would be that, right?
Joe and I realize it's time to do something different. And that starts with not only talking about Donald Trump, but also talking with him.
So is this the approach that is going to work with a gentleman who campaigned on calling the media the enemy of the people?
So I actually think it was the right thing to do. And I've heard a lot of folks on the left coming after Joe and Mika saying, don't normalize him. Well, 75 million plus American voters normalized Donald Trump by making him President-elect Donald Trump. In this notion that if sort of the resistance who opposes him stayed in their safe bubbles, sat on their hands and just complained about him for 4 years, that would have a bigger impact than sitting down. I talked to Mika, actually. They met with him for over 90 minutes. They raised very valid concerns. They both see themselves as opinion journalists who want to actually be able to engage the person that they talk about every day, actually be able to raise issues with them when they're concerned.
They all pretty much know his positions, right? I mean, Trump doesn't hide things. What would be great if we started calling Mika Brzezinski Mike or Mikey Brzezinski. I think I'm going to do that if I remember.
And in the same way that I thought it was right for Joe Biden to meet with him, and that I think it's right for presidents to meet with foreign adversaries to try to find diplomatic relations and ways to bring people together and solve problems, this is absolutely the right thing. I would sit down with Donald Trump. I would interview Donald Trump. And I'll go a step further. I hope good people work for him. We need to stop demonizing people because they supported a man who just became president of the United States. We should hope good people are around him and smart journalists are challenging him.
Well.
Yeah, well, none of it's going to matter. But what's this brainiac going to say?
Look, there is a sobering reality, right? Which is that we have, in 2016, I think people voted for the unknown and voted thinking maybe the gravitas of the office was going to change him. It didn't. In 2024, people voted knowing who he was. And nothing that he is doing, as concerning as I find it and disturbing.
You know, you guys backed a senile candidate, the guy with obvious dementia, and you're not admitting that because it became public and everyone knew it. And so that would be on you guys, right?
I find it should be shocking because he told us he was going to do these things.
Yeah.
He was surrounded by the people he's appointing, and he is keeping to his word. And people voted for him knowing that. And so it's hard. It's a sobering truth. It's hard to reconcile that with what we have been doing for the last 8 years.
Wait, you actually think you've been doing something? You think you've been doing something for the last 8 years? It's having an effect on people? The people that would watch your show were going to vote for whoever the Democrats put up there, possibly, because Kamala Harris was a disaster as a candidate. She's a horrible candidate. I mean, everyone should have recognized that, unlikable, and they violated democratic principles. I mean, she didn't win a primary. They didn't let Joe Biden run the primary because they didn't want him to lose to RFK Jr. or make RFK Jr. relevant or any of these things. And so the Democrats just completely went against the principles of democracy.
I will never sit with him. I don't think I'm going to have to. I don't think I'm going to have to make the decision because I don't think I'm ever going to get invited. And listen, the truth of the matter is, as we...
She's not going to sit with them. You know, like, you have no relevance, right? Like, these people think that they have some influence over what happens and they're doing some kind of work here. It's nothing, right? You know, it's just the internet and the world is full of people giving their opinions. You know, I just talked to somebody who, the guy I call the dodgy truther, who he sends me stuff about dodgy. He's an Indian, who does the Sajmarg meditation, and, he hates dodgy or whatever is that going on there. He's got a group of people. He posts stuff on Facebook, and he's the one who sends me stuff, like the most recent, his dodgy son, the family business that Dodgy, Kamesh Patel is a part of, the meditation that I do, that they embezzled $170 million or defrauded people out of that investor money with their scam. And the SEC is charging them, has put indictment, right? And I'm like, nothing's going to change. I mean, they're like, getting the information out to all the people who do the meditation, they're not going to change their opinions, right? Like, I just, he sent me this thing where he was trying to tell me that, something I believed in wasn't true, which I already know he believes that. He sent me a long, message. And I was telling him in a voiceover I'm going to cover in my Journey series that, I was putting the voiceover I sent to him, that we don't influence anything. People think that if you're out there on social media, you're influencing people. I think about the amount of people you've been able to change their minds about something, and then it's stuck, right? You might be able to have a conversation with people, and they gravitate to your point of view in some way. You can sort of influence them, but then they just listen to somebody else and they go back to their way of thinking, right? I mean, even the people who are closest to you. You don't have exact same beliefs as the people in your life, right? Even the people that you're closest to believe the same things you do. No two people have the same beliefs, right? Everyone's got their own decision-making power, right? And so these dopes who are network TV, who have an audience of mostly sheeple and old sheeple, like boomer hippie sheeple, people who used to watch, who still watch the news, and they think that they have some kind of influence, and they don't. It's been shown over and over again. They have no effect on anything, right? You're a complete limp dick in it.
Around this table that it is hard to criticize and denounce the abuses of power by Donald Trump when he is president.
It's real hard to do that. It's so hard. It's going to be so hard to do that. It's going to be so hard to get up here and do what you've been doing for the past 8 years. Talking to, there's like no effect, right? Like it means nothing. What you're doing means nothing.
We have been there before. It means threats. It means death threats. It means retribution against your family. It means crazy things showing up at your house. It means lawsuits. It means all sorts of things. We've done it before.
So why do it? Why would you do this, right? I mean, we all know what you guys think about Donald Trump. Do you think that when you stop talking about Donald Trump, anything's going to change? No, nothing. Nothing's going to change there.
And if we have to do it again, we will do so again. I think there's a lot of people who are probably looking at what Joe and Mika did and find it opportunistic. There are people who change.
See, the thing is, if you guys had a champion, if Joe Biden was actually a good guy, and he didn't have a crackhead son who was peddling influence and selling his father's influence, and Joe Biden didn't do the war in the Ukraine, and he didn't drone 7 kids in Afghanistan. He wasn't a scumbag that snoozles and sniffs little girls' hairs and all the stuff he did. And if Kamala Harris was a legitimate candidate, if they didn't violate the Democratic Party's principles by just imposing her as the candidate of choice without going through a democratic process and all the things, all of it. Like if they didn't, if Joe Biden just didn't do something that could provoke World War III, and on his way out is a big fuck you to everybody or whatever that is all about, right? If those things weren't true, if he was a good guy, that'd be one thing, but he isn't. And if we had good people before him, like any of these, former presidents and politicians, if Chuck Schumer wasn't a scumbag, right? If there wasn't just overall lying and, false flag events and warmongering and, if we weren't a country that celebrates and pushes for the murdering of fetuses.
There's stripes, or maybe there's spots, I should say today, depending on who is in power and what benefits them. I don't know that that's what they are doing. And to me, it's a to be determined situation because right now it's the transition.
What's great about this is, and it's going to be CNN too. I'm going to show you a clip from CNN. They're imploding, right? And they're imploding because their warped worldview. And I don't know how much they're aware of it, how much they're awake personally to their own hypocrisy, right? But, they've created this nemesis in Donald Trump. And a lot of the stuff they say about him is true, and he may do all the things that they're saying. And I got to get into him because he's already going to use the military and impose martial law, basically. I mean, he tweeted that out last night in True Social, which I'll get into because that's a big thing. He is that guy, but he isn't worse than their guy or any of their guys or any of their girls or any of their people. Like they're all scum, right? So to pretend that there's good scum and bad scum, right? Like that's the whole silliness of it. And that you would risk personal whatever things that went on, threats and harassment, whatever. Like if Donald Trump's going to do that and he's going to push back against these ladies on The View because he's petty and all those things and his followers or whatever it is, right? Like for nothing because you have no influence. You're just like, you're limp dick in it. You have nothing, right?
We don't know what he's going to do as president. We don't know what they're going to do if he commits abuses of power as president. So, everybody has to live with their decision. Everybody has to look at themselves in the mirror. I'm good.
I absolutely think
She's good. She looks at herself in the mirror and she's good about shilling for a guy who had Parkinson's, and it was. I mean, all she's good.
the right decision, and I think it's good that they work on MSNBC. I don't want only Fox people going to see them. That was some of the problem here that I think everyone can agree, maybe even people that voted for Trump can agree, that the things they're watching on Fox are wrong. That's the only network that's had to pay billions of dollars because they got it wrong. So I don't want only Fox.
They got it wrong. Fox is a problem, and we're the good guys.
People sitting down with him. I want everyone. I don't need to know their motivation. I just know you get nowhere in silence. Conversations had to be had. I also don't believe in we don't platform or we don't do these things. I feel like those are very pie in the sky.
So you're saying deplatforming didn't work now. All these guys pushed for social media constraints that we weren't allowed to say what we believe. They could shill for this piece of shit Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, but we couldn't say what we believed on the internet. They wanted to shut it down. They pushed for censorship. They pushed for our First Amendment violation because the government pressured social media companies, which was against their self-interest. Because the social media companies, there was a Netflix documentary about it, and it talked about how, I forget what it's called, it's not important, but it was about how social media was pushing conspiracy theorists. And the reason they were doing it is because people wanted to see that shit, right? They wanted people to stay on their sites. And then when they started to censor that, I had all these people that were semi-truthers. A lot of them were right-wing truthers. And they started talking about going to jail. I'm like, wow, these people are being arrested. And I realized they were talking about Facebook jail. And Facebook would suspend their account for a month when they posted stuff they had been posting for years. Because Joe Biden administration violated our First Amendment rights by threatening to take away Title 552 or whatever it's called, that allowed these social media giants to be free from litigation liability for things that were posted on their sites, right? And so if they take that away, those sites would have to shut down. So he was, using, it wasn't Biden, it was Biden people, and these people pushed all that shit, right? But now you're saying, we should all allow free speech now all of a sudden? Allow discourse, right? Because they're complete shills.
If you're not having conversations and winning on ideas, you're not moving anywhere. So to me, this is what the country decided. He's not calling me, but if
He's not calling me either, to be clear.
He doesn't know who I am. But if he did, I would absolutely...
That's a good thing.
I would absolutely sit down and always have a conversation because I'm confident enough to sit at a table in contrast and disagree when I disagree. I'm not scared. I'm not afraid. You have the conversation.
She's tough. She's not afraid to go sit and go toe-to-toe with Trump's.
Or nothing happens.
Are you talking?
Look at Sonny.
Well, okay.
Where's Joy?
Look, the bottom line is that America needs a free press that is willing to speak truth to power.
Okay, so you did that with Biden, did you? It's just silly. You guys were never free, or you just volunteered to be shills, either way.
Right now, more than ever.
Woo!
And
Woo!
I think that we have to be very clear-eyed when we think about the president-elect.
Wait, clear-eyed? What? Clear-eyed is overrated. People say shit like that all the time.
And cover the president-elect. And I don't think you need to sit down for 90 minutes at Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ring to be able to speak truth and to be able to
Kissing his ring, she's laying it on here.
cover a story. So maybe they're not journalists in
The View panel's quite divided on this issue.
true sense. Maybe they're saying that they're opinion journalists. But we have to remember that Trump is the guy who ushered in the era of fake news.
Boom, fake news. He ushered it in. It was just legitimate news, and everything we've done is legitimate. There's no fake news that we've covered. And there was no bullshit news before Trump. Trump ushered that in. And all the stuff on the internet that people were gravitating to. And we had no idea why we lost our audience. and all that stuff. And then we decided to call it fake news because we were getting killed by it, because people would rather get their information from independent people with no journalistic training than watch us shill for a guy who's, pooping in his Depends diapers.
He is the guy who ushered in alternative facts.
Alternative facts. Like, nobody lied before Donald Trump. Nobody bullshitted. Nobody said anything that was went against the official story before him. There was no, people didn't have opinions. People believed the news. People believed everything they were told. And before Donald Trump started all that movement. Even though the truth movement existed and Donald Trump tried to co-opt it for his personal gain in 2015, even though since 2001, there's been a big truth movement on the internet. And there's just all these videos that were truther videos and these things that are alternative facts that they don't agree with the official story backed by the government, the corporate giants that pay our bills.
He is the guy who attacked 3 black female journalists. He's the guy that revoked Jim Acosta's press credentials for asking him a question. And so I think that this...
He's the guy who did that. Joe Biden's the guy who literally threatened social media giants if they posted things that were true about, that came out to be true about his son Hunter and things RFK Jr. said and other things that were a threat to his political future. And so that's censored. I mean, Joe Biden was elected because Hunter Biden's story was censored. I mean, if you believe any of the official story, that's what happened. Like, that's come out now, right? And you guys didn't speak up for talking truth to power about that shit, right? Right, Sonny?
President-elect, I hate to say it, would like nothing more than to have only Fox News cover him, would like nothing more than a state-sponsored media. And I don't think he can be trusted in the way that other presidents can be trusted.
How's this show still on the air? Like, what's their ratings like?
This is an aberration.
But the reality is he doesn't just have Fox News. He didn't do a lot of mainstream media this election, but he went on Joe Rogan and reached 50 million people.
Yeah.
How many you guys reach a day? Like, if Joe Rogan's thing reached 50 million, how many do you guys reach? Because it's like, is it less than 1 million of brain dead sheeple? Like, so, like, why are you still talking like I mean, you get paid, sure. You're making some money here. But don't pretend like you make a difference.
Could talk to Donald Trump again. No mainstream legacy media could, and he's still going to reach the vast majority of this country. So I actually think extremely highly of both Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. I don't think this is opportunistic. I don't think that this is a judgment on their character. I think they recognize
it's pronounced Mikey Brzezinski.
75 million people voted for this guy. He will be in power short of something, an impeachment for the next 4 years. So where can we make some changes on the margins? My first day, if I could say real quick,
okay.
My first day in the Trump White House working for Pence was the day of the Las Vegas shooting.
Oh, she worked for Pence.
Donald Trump worked with Congress to ban bump stocks. The Supreme Court later overturned it. One small thing like that could save lives. I'm not going to say I don't want...
It could have saved lives. It could have. It just could have saved some lives, and it didn't because Congress blocked it. But Donald Trump was up for gun grabbing.
I want to change anything if I have to acknowledge that this person exists and speak to him. I'd like to have marginal change.
I'm going to wait and see what I'm dealing with. As I've said since the election, because I don't know. I see some things that seem strange to me, but now they're starting to seem strange to other people too. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to have some popcorn. And when I have something to say...
See, Mika and Joe Scarborough all these people have no influence on the election, because if they did, nobody would have voted for Trump. If they believed that Trump was a convicted felon, if they believed all the things about Trump, or if they do believe those things, and they don't think your candidate and your party is better, right? Or they believe that you're just as bad, then these people have no influence, like all these media people across all the Democratic platforms. They have zero influence. Like the people who listen to them, we're going to vote for Kamala, whoever, right? The people who are listening to them, there's no independent people, there's no people on the margins that are influenced by anything that they've said the past 4 years. And all the stuff that's been anti-Trump, the constant drum that Trump is responsible for everything, right? Everything bad in the world. And so they have zero influence. And so, like, they're talking about two people who have zero influence and they have zero influence. Like, they matter. Like, it's silly. Like, it's just silly. You know? Like, they don't know that it's just, everything's, again, everything's rigged and the whole system is whatever it is. But in the rigging of the system, what people believe and choose to believe has no influence on what ends up happening in the world and in the political world or anything else, right? I mean, your beliefs influence your life to whatever extent, but things just go in a certain way beyond anybody's control. Like, people just are automatons, and they just, follow the tide one way or another. They're swayed by, people don't really think for themselves like everyone thinks they do. Like, it's just, it's something where it's almost like you're a robot that thinks it's having its own ideas. Like, you're being directed by forces beyond your control, some of them on the material plane, the evil forces, and some of them your own personal samskaras and your own personal spiritual baggage, and then the divinity within you and the divine path that's being guided by beings beyond our comprehension, right? And so there's all these influences that people have, and they don't really even know it. They think that their choices and their thoughts are their own.
I will say it. And we'll go from there, because to predict what we're going to do is impossible to do until we know what we're going to do. So I'm just going to sit, and I don't say everybody should do that, but I want to see what we're up against.
Okay, and if you decide something else, what are you going to do? Talk shit about Mika and Joe? That's like what? So what difference? You're either going to support them or not, and it makes zero difference. This has no, What you guys could do was take responsibility and say, Donald Trump isn't worse than Joe Biden, right? That Donald Trump isn't worse than Kamala Harris. That would be the one thing that you guys could do. That when in reality, you guys shilled for a guy who is just as bad, and everything you accuse Trump of, you yourselves were a part of. Violating democracy, violating free speech, all these things. Illegal wars, killing of people, murdering kids, all these things, right? Everything that you said Trump was doing, Joe Biden did, and you participated and supported it.
I want to see what's going to happen, because I believe that there's enough of a mix in both Senate and Congress and all these folks that some things that we have great fear of may not happen, and some things we haven't thought about may be looming in the future. So I just want to be clear-eyed and watch it come at me.
Clear-eyed. The clear-eyed thing was good. Okay, so the majority of content out there now, there's been a move towards opinion-based content. And so, they would have the official stories, reporters who were writing stories that were supposed to be objective. They would have their perspective, and, their paper would lean one way or another, and their audience would be whatever it was. But newspapers would have to appeal to both Democrats and Republicans. So if you had a city, you would have conservative people and liberal people and everyone in between. So when you wrote about the news, you weren't supposed to have any sort of a bias. And if there was a bias, you had to hide it. I mean, of course, you did have a bias, but you would have to hide it, right? And so the news was just them reporting on something without editorializing and giving any sort of context and view, their own personal view about what was going on. But that's not what the news is now, right? The news is about people debating their personal beliefs and opinions, and that's what the skanks on The View are doing, and what they do on CNN and MSNBC and all these shows. They bring in these pundits, but the reporters, the anchors themselves are very opinionated and are very biased, and they have their personal agenda, and they're acting as shills and spinning and using talking points, right? I show that over and over again on both sides. And Fox News started it, so all the Trumpers who whine about it now, it was started by the right. Like, you can't whine about it when Fox News and the right wing started it, because people really wanted to hear people's opinions, and then it turned into what we do on the internet and podcasts. But these people want to say their opinions are legitimate and our opinions aren't. These shills that work for Big Pharma have these dildos, coming coming at them for that with Big Pharma written on them, and all these other corporate alliances and the intelligence agencies and the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, if you're Fox or whatever it is, they want to say their opinions are more valid, even though they're completely owned and handled, and their opinions are dictated by, so much of their opinions are dictated by the very narrow bandwidth and rules that are there to allow them to express themselves, right? And so the whole thing's silly. Like, for them to think that they get to come out and their opinions matter, but they should be able to silence our opinions on social media because people don't want to listen to their shit, right? People much rather listen to a podcast or something like I do here, and there's so many different individual type takes out there, and personas on social media. You end up finding a few people, or multiple people, or just one person that represents the way that you believe and resonates with you. Whereas these generic shows that are just mainstream crap and fake and phony and insincere and inauthentic, and they just don't resonate with anybody. I'm going to show you Brian Stelter coming up here and CNN, and they do the same bullshit, right? Like, they're all whining about what they call fake news, but they're doing the same thing we're doing, verbalizing their opinions. They just have a bigger budget and they're more controlled, and they suck at it. They're just more unwatchable. Like, and the people that they can get to watch them are the most undesirable people, like the worst people, the least people the least ability to think for themselves, the people with the least future, the least being innovative, people who are just clinging to the old. I mean, it's older folks for the most part, right? Who are clinging to the old format of news, and they look at these people as trustworthy. I mean, who would watch The View? Like, who would go and be a fan of the fucking View? Like, how could you be a fan of this show? Like, how can this show entertain you? Like, things appeal to you, right? You watch a certain genre of movies. You like horror movies. You like science fiction. You like comedy. You like romantic comedy, right? You like these different TV shows, different kinds of TV shows. And you should be able to say what appeals to you. Like, once in a while, my wife and I will watch something stupid. Like, we watch something that's not like, it's lowbrow, like whatever it is, right? Like, I could watch Cops. The show Cops is still on, apparently. I can watch it for about 5 minutes, but it negatively affects your condition. Like, I can watch something like Jerry Springer used to be, those shows, but only for 5 minutes. And now, it affects my spiritual condition. It's just a lowbrow kind of thing, right? But I can tell you what appeals to me about it. It's funny, right? There's humor in it. I can watch this stuff that I mock, as long as I'm mocking it, for only a short period of time. I couldn't sit down and watch an hour of The fucking View to entertain myself, right? Like, that would be torturous. I'd rather just sit there and stare at a wall than watch these bimbos give their opinions about things and just, aggravate the crap out of me with how remedial and stupid and worthless their opinions are. Like, there's a lot of worthless opinions that, all of the opinions are, in a sense, worthless in the sense that don't really affect anything. It affects your life and the way you're going to live your life. But people's opinions have very little to do with what's going to happen in the world, right? Like, if we got a vote, so you sit down to watch a sporting event, and let's say half the people are rooting for one team and half the people are rooting for the other team. And so somebody's opinions about who's going to win, or half the people pick one team and bet for one team, and then half the people pick the other team. Half the people are wrong, right? And the ones who are right, it has no bearing on them. They just happen to flip a coin and be on the right side of things. And so, this was this opinion-based world we lived in, where everybody has opinion and nobody listens to other people's opinions, so they have almost no effect, right? People don't want to hear most people's opinions, and most of the opinions they want to listen to are people that believe what they believe. And so, it has no effect at all. It's just pointless, right? And, it can be entertaining, but that's about it. And it can be informative, depending on the right person. But most of it's just shit. Okay, so Brian Stelter, as you guys all know, had this show called Reliable Sources, which was, he had this guy named Donny O'Sullivan, who was the anti-conspiracy theorist guy. And the show was just about exposing fake news, what CNN considers fake news, and telling you who the reliable sources were. people who would give you legitimate information that came from the CIA and the government and the corporations and, all the powers that be into their crappy show that nobody watched. The show bombed in two places. They pushed for that CNN Plus app, remember? And they were getting only 3,000 views. That guy came over from Fox, Chris, whatever his name was, Wallace. And he's gone now. His show did disastrously on CNN Plus, and then he's had two shows since, which have bombed. Brian Stelzer was fired, and they have now got a comedy show on at night, which sucks. And CNN just finds new ways to suck, right? And so he's quoting this guy, John Berman who's had a morning show that's gotten his ass kicked by Morning Joe. I mean, it's amongst the Democratic dopes that watch Morning Joe, watch this kind of media. More people would rather watch MSNBC Morning Joe than this guy, John Brennan, on CNN. They moved him around 3 or 4 different times because he's can't win an audience either, right? And so here they are talking. It says, I'm John Brennan. You might know me from cable morning show, though not the one that you might soon have a defense secretary who paid a woman that accused him of sexual assault, nor the one that just sent 2 anchors to Mar-a-Lago, then talked about like it was the Yalta summit. Well, you have to define yourself by Morning Joe. That's how bad you suck. Because Morning Joe, the worst shills, the most pro-Biden people, over the top, just total bullshit, right? Just goofy stuff, right? And this guy's got to ride their coattails, right? He's their competition. He's failing.
Good evening. Abby is out. I'm John Berman. You might know me from a cable morning show, though not the one that might soon have a defense secretary who paid a woman that accused him of sexual assault, nor the one that just sent 2 anchors to Mar-a-Lago, then talked about it like it was the Yalta summit. No, I co-host the morning show here on CNN that starts...
Yeah, the one that nobody watches and is getting killed by Morning Joe. Is it this face? Is it this why? Like it's because you're obnoxious and you're not funny and you suck at your job even worse than they suck at their job? Is that even possible? Like, how is that even possible, right? But they're getting really catty and bitchy. I mean, the Democratic establishment, and they're going at each other and everyone's like pointing fingers. It's, way better than this part is way better than it was when Trump won 2016. The initial shock of him winning was great, but then it was just like, well, they all gathered this resolved and they realized, oh my God, we're going to get ratings finally. like all of them realized that they were going to get ratings and they were going to be doing well in the ratings, right? And that all happened, right? But now, this is like the infighting is great.
In like 10 minutes, so let's get right to what America is talking about.
Yeah, but just not here with you. And what is America talking about? I could find out, but I don't know. It's just going to be some bullshit thing. So, this happened. Ivanka is unrecognizable. I don't know what she did to her face. And who's that guy behind him? What's that guy doing? So this is pretty bad. And this is what everyone should be concerned about with Trump. I'm pretty sure he's going to do this. And it is a step towards, martial law. This is martial law, what he's talking about here.
Donald Trump confirmed on Monday that he would use military forces to enact the largest deportation in American history. He said this on Truth Social in response to...
Okay, so this is from New York Post, but it's being covered by multiple people. Good news, reports are incoming. Real Donald Trump administration prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse Biden invasion through a mass deportation program. Okay, so they don't show his, this is this guy posting what he did on Twitter, I guess. So this idea that he is going to declare a national emergency, which means he's doing that now for something he's going to do in, 3 months. The national emergency will be that there's this immigration crisis, and it's not a national emergency. And he'll be bringing in troops which will be engaged with American civilians, which is, posse comitatus. It's just all the stuff you're not supposed to do. And he thinks he has a mandate from people to do this. Now, people want the immigrant crisis over, especially the ones that's, that they've been, all this fear-based shit that Donald Trump put out there. He lied about a bunch of it, and they made the crisis sound worse than it actually is. It's not a great thing. I definitely agree that it's an issue. Calling it a crisis, well, amongst many other crises like World War III that's going on, these things are potential crises. And so bringing the American military, turn it on the American people, just in the guise of getting rid of immigrants, and all the Republicans and patriots and all these dopes who are Donald Trump followers who are so anti-immigration will buy into this, but then it sets a precedent and it breaks this posse comitatus thing, which is the military can't be turned on the people. Because it happens in every fucking country and it's really bad. And when it happens, you get really bummed out when the military starts coming into your town and R-ing your women and stealing your food and bullying you and just all the things that militaries do when they occupy. Like the American military will occupy, people's, whatever it is, their neighborhoods. And, this is inevitable. And what happens when there's a Democratic president who has the same ability now to use these troops to get you guys, right? You think it's great because Trump's doing it. What happens in 4 years from now? When Trump's, or just what happens when, even sooner than that. Like, we don't even know what J.D. Vance will do. That crazy fuck, right? And so, all of this is bad. So here they are talking about on CNN. This is that dope John Berman.
There's nothing more sacred or more serious that you could ask an American service member to do than deploy opposite American civilians. It is really a sacred and terrifying prospect for anybody who's been in uniform. I've been to combat. You could send me to Iraq, but to stand me across from American protesters in situations like we've seen across America is wrought with a tremendous burden you're going to put on men and women in uniform. So it has to be approached with the utmost seriousness.
When I talked about gun grabbing or any of these things, imposing the will of the government on the people, the only way to really do it, you can't do it with the police. There's not enough police and they don't have the training, and the police just won't do it. Because the police are going to be loyal to their neighborhoods and the people they know, and not the American government. And American soldiers, this is where you almost have to have foreign military come to your area. And they've done joint training missions with these various foreign militaries to do just that, right? Because, I was talking about this with my brother, and, he was in Vietnam, and when he came back from Vietnam, he had to do some of his, whatever it was, time that was left on his, whatever he enlisted for. He had another 8-9 months to be in the military. And he was stationed in Philadelphia, and there was protests, and he was ordered to go in there and break up a protest. And he was like a drill sergeant at that time. And he told his men he told one of them to go get some beers. And they sat there in the truck and drank beers in Philadelphia, and they didn't go to the protest. Because he's like, that's just a nightmare situation, right? You're going to, someone's going to pop in, you're going to shoot somebody, someone's going to get shot, and they're going to blame the soldiers. And, it was wrought with all that, the tension that was there in the hippie movement, all that stuff, right? And it was like, my brother felt like it was a setup, right? And it was, to exacerbate these situations. American military is going to, because I said that, I'm like, I was talking to him, and he goes, yeah, I know, because I didn't do it. American soldiers don't want to have to engage with American citizens, right? Because of this reason. This is what this guy's saying. But Trump is a dope, and he doesn't care about this, and he's devoid of all connection to any kind of, in his life and his perspective. He doesn't have people that he knows that were in the military, and he hangs out with these generals and elite people. But he has no idea what it's like for these military people to go to the places where they're from and, order the civilians to do, occupy the civilian population, right? It's hard for them to do that. And if they are able to do that, then America will go in a different direction than it is now, right? But if they don't do that, then there'll be other issues with that as well. But it comes down to, is the American military going to shoot civilians? But Trump making this happen over immigration, again, getting right-wing backing for it, because, it's just about immigration. Yeah, but what if it's about something else later on, right? Like, what if they use this as a tool, like I talked about with the fourth movie in the Star Wars, there are 9 movies. The one where, or the 6th movie where Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader. And the second trilogy, it's all about this guy who's the Chancellor, who's really the Sith Lord, manipulating the circumstances where he can get a clone army and create an empire where he used to have a democracy, right? And he was changing the democratic, this democratic political system they had on a universal basis into what became the empire, the evil empire that dominated the first 3 movies, right? And so, this is what's happening now. You can manipulate a circumstance to break policies that are there to protect you. Remember all these dopey Cubies, they wanted to have secret military tribunals where some of these celebrities like Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg and some of these guys who they were convinced were pedos, with limited evidence. Certainly they had the right to due process because they're American citizens, but they wanted Hillary Clinton, all these people to be rendered, taken to Guantanamo Bay and gone through secret military tribunals and executed or locked away for life without having their due process, their legal rights. And so that's how quickly these so-called patriots caved on something that is sacred. You don't give up that shit, right? You're so divorced from what it was like not to have those things, but people in other countries are coming to America because they don't have those fucking things. That's why there's an immigration problem, you fucking dopes, because people are coming to this country because they don't have those things that Trump is trying to take away and Biden was trying to take away. They're all trying to take away, right? They're both working to take those things away from you because they really can't impose the stuff they want to impose on you until your rights are gone. And so...
and obviously, there's no General Milley there now to stop a deployment like this. So we'll find out if the Secretary of Defense is confirmed and how the senior leaders...
This guy's co-founder of American Veterans for the Ukraine. So, it's just all these dopes here. Here's the Republic guy.
Tell me the priority that the American people want focused on is illegal immigration.
That doesn't mean
the
they want
priorities
this,
are,
does it?
they want this solved now.
They want to solve it. They don't want the 82nd Airborne dropping in New York City.
I'll tell you something.
I think you're being a little dramatic.
I have a shop in my neighborhood, actually, right in my neighborhood.
Okay, let's let her talk. Julie Radzinsky.
On the Upper West Side of Manhattan, there is a shelter that houses undocumented immigrants. And I can guarantee you, I can promise you with every fiber of my being, because I'll probably be one of those people, that if anybody comes for these people and tries to drag them out by force, there will be protests of people like me, American citizens.
Okay, you're going to protest the American military?
Who are going to stand there and do everything possible to prevent these women and children, which is all who these people are.
How about the criminals? How about the terrorists? How about the convicted?
How do you sort
Stop!
through
How do you know who it is?
How do you sort through
That's the problem. I don't know who.
Stop. I'm sorry. I live next to these people. I can tell you they are women and they are children. Are there
Are
terrorists
any of the women and children terrorists?
among them? I don't know. But I can tell you that
Well, they're breaking the law. And, the protests you guys do are going to be lame because they're always lame. And if you're the military, you're going to run like little cowards when the military starts beating you guys. This is just the silly people. The whole thing is just an absolute joke. But what Trump's doing here is horrible. And, if he's announcing this on Truth Social, and this is what he's going to do, declare a national emergency and then declare martial law, because that's what it would take to impose the military. And, I hope people say you can't do that, but I think Trump's going to get away with doing a lot more things, at least in the beginning. And then things will be breaking down, right? And then, what happens when things go south? What happens when American citizens get killed by U.S. military that Trump imposed on the American people? It's just like what happened with the making the vax mandatory. Became something where now it's going to be harder to do a second time. So, hopefully something like that will happen. Where you push something and then it backfires. And so that's the only good thing that come out of it. But if Trump sets a standard and a precedent to impose, martial law and put military people on the streets, that's coming for you. That's going to come around to all of us at some point. I just want to add a little voiceover here about people not dealing with Trump, what Trump really is. Talking about the Trumpers and the few Trumpers that come to me and, that are here. you can't ask other people to do something you haven't been able to do yourself, right? And I'm not asking anybody to do anything, but even mocking people. You can't mock people who haven't done what you've been able to do. And so, in my life, I've been able to face difficult truths that really were a bummer. And I've had to do it numerous times about people in my life and, more importantly about myself. And then, of course, most recently about this guy Dodgy and the Sizemore system, right? So to compare that to people who believe that Trump is their savior and Trump's going to make America great again, people who bought into this whole, cult of Trump, right? My thing was a lot harder because this guy Dodgy, Kamlesh, was somebody I knew, and he had been a good practitioner in the system, and he was chosen to be the successor of the previous master of the system, who, whose work was impeccable, his character was impeccable, and the system had transformed transformed me and so many other people, and was just a wonderful system of meditation. I can't even explain how good it is, but it was just amazing. And I was there as Dodgy was, I was actually, I had early experiences of him being a good, solid spiritual person. And I had, everyone has issues, but I had full faith in his ability to be the next master of the system. And I was there in India while he was being made the master, and I had some, difficult interactions with him, but I also saw a lot of positive things. And when Charji finally passed away in 2014, in December, and me and my family were traveling, and we came back to the ashram, and I saw Dodgy, and I could see he was the master. Like I had, the same way as just a feeling and the energy that the person exudes. It's hard to describe, but if you see somebody as a higher spiritual being, and the essence of their energy, you could just, it's amazing. It's something that's really hard to describe, but those of us who experienced it with Charji, and you could see it with Dodgy. So I had no doubt that he was the master and he was going to be a good master. But then he just shit the bed, and he got into criminal things, and he wrecked the system, and he just, he destroyed Charji's legacy, and it's just a horrible, set of things that he did. He had this scam, and just a lot of it was stupid. The way he handled COVID was so unmasterly and not even, just incompetently on every level. He handled COVID worse than any of our politicians, worse than Trump, Biden, worse than the U.S. government. It was so bad. His stuff and the things he was saying, he was blaming it on chickens and pangolin, and he was a pharmacist, and he was just all over the place with the thing, closing the ashram, and just being stupid about it. And for years, he was the last person to open the ashram back up, and when everyone had moved on, almost no one was getting COVID in India comparatively. It doesn't do well in humid areas. And yet he just, it was unbelievable what he was doing. And my viewers were like, this guy, the people who I was telling about him and the system, they didn't have the positive experiences I did, and they didn't have the faith in the system I did. And, I struggled with it, but then the information started to come in. I went public in one of my Journey series, and I talked about some of the things I was having problems with them. And all these people that were in India showed up, and they told me about all the shit he's doing and how they're freaked out. And, thousands of people in India were quitting the system or were, just being threatened and bullied. And he was surrounding himself by thugs. And, it's a real shit show. and most recently, his family, they had already gone bankrupt. He had a pharmacy business, 7 pharmacies, and he turned it over to his kids, who tried to make it into a large scale, where they were taking investor money to build it into an online pharmacy. They were acquiring pharmacies that would just be delivery only, and you'd order online, and people would come deliver the pharmaceuticals to your house, right? And they got $170 million of investor money, and then went bankrupt and absconded with the money to India, right? Real scumbag stuff. And the SEC has charged them with crimes and all these things. That's happened since I realized that this guy was a piece of shit, right? But it sucked for me because I knew him. We were almost you could almost say friends, and he had invested in me, and he had done some things. He had been nice to me in different ways and helped me. And, he was, it wasn't like we had a bad relationship. He'd done some fucked up stuff out of his, stupidity and just just being a fail. But, it was tough for me to accept this. And for me, this is the solution to humanity's problem, the transmission, the cleaning, the meditation system. And the organization, after just 3 masters, folded like a card house, right? And, I'm still kind of stunned by it. But, the truth is the truth. It's there. I could go into denial about it, but, what good is that going to do? And so me realizing this about something that's very personal to me and something that, I just can't say enough good things about, the Sajmarg meditation. And for that to turn into a cult and me having to confront all that stuff, right, is a lot harder than people realizing that some piece of shit like Trump, who they barely really know, and, it's just, there's so many degrees of separation between you and Trump where there was no separation between me and the organization and the masters of the system and Sajmarg. Is a completely much harder thing for me to accept, especially since I saw him, I knew him when he was better, and I saw these other things, right? And so, because I've been able to do that in my life and different things, accept the hard truths about things, that are painful, that things I don't want to know, I didn't want to hear about. I went through it when, I realized the big event in 2001 was some kind of false flag or whatever it was. I just, for a couple of weeks, it was like, I knew the government lied, and I knew that there was, dark shit and shady shit and conspiracies, but this was next level. And so we all go through those things, and many people on the right never have gone through that because they've always believed that the left has created some sort of deep state-like government situation, and they, it's easy for them to believe that some right-wing hero is going to come save them like Trump. And so they've never really had to go through confronting things that they really believe in that are fake or bad for you or not real, like their religion. Like their religion isn't what they think it is, right? And a lot of the teachings of the religion are not true. It's just bullshit. And so, being able to confront that stuff. And lots of people haven't, and all these Trumpers aren't able to do that. People who would, if it was Joe Biden, would say that was a fake assassination attempt, and they'd see all the things that I'm saying. They'd watch my videos about the fake, assassination for Trump stuff, and they agree with it 100%. And then, if it was about Biden, but when they see it's about Trump, they're like, no way, that would never happen. He would never do that. And come on, he's a lying sack of shit, and he's always been a con man. And he's not the guy that you think he is. And that is a very dangerous thing now that he's pushing for martial law, and we're on the cusp of World War III and all these other things. And he's a failure and a loser. And he's always just had people and systems bail him out, going bankrupt, screwing people on their, vendors and hardworking people out of their money. And he's done this over and over again. And so that's why I say these things. I know a lot of Trumpers. Very few Trumpers are going to, they're just going to ride this thing out and see what happens. But they did it last time, and they're pretty bummed at Trump at the end. And remember the QBs, the QAnon people, they had to run and hide after they said all these things were going to happen when Trump lost. In that debacle and the whole January 6th thing happened, and the QBs, they were nowhere to be seen. I used to get Q comments all the time, people telling me how wrong I was, and telling me I was a shill and all the shit that QBs do. And then after they got rolled by Trump and Trump's loss in 2020, but now they're back in full force, believing that he's going to do what he should have done the first time or what they wish he had done the first time. But in reality, the stuff that he's going to do, most of it's going to be bad. It's going to expedite the collapse of our system. Anyways, let me continue on with some other stuff here. Okay, so there have been a number of developments. I watched the Netflix series about the Red Sox comeback, right? So I think it's called The Comeback. It's a 3-part documentary, which I want to talk about at the end of the video. It's another one of these things, my life passing before my eyes kind of thing. But Trump has done so. There's a bunch of stuff here, but let's get started here with Trump. So this happened.
Tonight, a second Trump administration takes shape with several new nominations. The president-elect announced today he's chosen Dr. Mehmet Oz, the cardiologist, television host turned Pennsylvania Senate candidate, to lead the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid.
Okay, so, you should be. This guy got beaten down by Fetterman. So he was running against Fetterman, who was, just horrible before he had a stroke. Like the guy, he was this big, lurching, tattooed, inarticulate, not smart, like goofy, whatever he was, Democratic shill. And then he had a stroke in the middle of the campaign. So much so, like, he didn't know whether he was going to die or not. He had cardiac arrest, his heart stopped. I mean, all these things came out, right? And since then, he's barely functioning. But right after the stroke, he was at his worst. And he had to do a debate right after that. And the Democrats should have pulled him as a candidate. I mean, he was so bad. His debate was far worse than Joe Biden's worst debate against Trump that cost him. I mean, they pulled Joe Biden after that debate, but they left Fetterman in after his debate. He started the debate by saying, "Good night, everybody." And he couldn't understand questions, and it was babbling, incoherently. And he didn't lose any support, right, after that horrific performance that was watched by people across the country. So it's stunning how bad he was, and the Democratic establishment pushing this guy. And then he wins, and he gets suicidal and depressed, has to be checked into a facility. He has audio processing issues that still exist today. He doesn't understand people when they're talking to him. He was in this treatment center for a number of months. He didn't even start his job until 3 months after he was sworn in, which is another kind of great thing that, like, I love when the government makes a mockery of itself. But this guy couldn't beat him. And there were scandals with him, and he's like a daytime, one of these horrible freaking TV shows that he had. Just an absolute piece of shit. But he's a Trump loyalist. And he's in charge of Medicare and Medicaid, which are collapsing. And he's not competent to run it. And, God knows what Trump wants to do with it. But this is just a case of Trump's, his picking people that are loyal to him, that are unqualified and are just a disaster. And part of me loves it because of how I feel about the government and the presidency, and Trump makes a mockery of it by being a clown, like the ultimate clown. But, we're kind of in a crisis too, so it's like I enjoy it. You can hear it in my voice. It makes me, sort of giddy, makes me happy, but also it's horrible. It's the worst.
For Commerce Secretary, Trump is tapping campaign trail regular Howard Lutnick, CEO of the investment bank Cantor Fitzgerald.
So he is a banker. And so I don't know who that guy is, but Trump has connections to the banking industry, which is evil. But this is the big one.
And another staunch supporter, Linda McMahon, is Trump's pick for Education Secretary. McMahon led the Small Business Administration during Trump's first term.
Okay, so this is the worst. This is Vince McMahon's wife. Now, she has allowed Vince McMahon. She was like the business side. She ran the business side of WWE. So she has some qualification as a businesswoman, right? But no moral compass. So Vince McMahon cheated on her, and there's all that, and there's all these issues. And, she became part of the drama. She was a horrible actress. But she allowed her daughter to get asked in the face that some guy with his big, fat, cellulite ass. And he, after wrestling and being sweaty, he sat on her face in the middle of the ring. His daughter was completely degraded. Her daughter was completely degraded. And all these things, she allowed her son to jump off a 4-story, whatever it was, and land on a table, only to be kicked out and not be a part of to be, cut out of the business, right? Like all these things, she allowed her kids to endure, including the fact that Vince McMahon, he had all these depraved storylines, and his daughter agreed to all of them. But in the documentary, she said there was one that he wouldn't agree to, and it was that he impregnated her. Like he wanted a storyline where he had incestual relationship with his daughter, and play this out in front of kids and all these people. I mean, it's just so icky. It's so gross. There's nothing good about WWE. It's so lowbrow. It's so violent. It's so, immoral and degraded, and all the weird sexual stuff and all the, all of it. Like, it's just icky. It's gross. And Trump is a big part of that, and so is she. And she has, doesn't have any connection to what would make her a qualified candidate for the Department of Education, and comes in because they donated a lot of money, and, Trump is a WWE, and he ran his campaign with WWE stuff, and he believes in the WWE because he's a lowbrow, even with all his, guy who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he loves this lowbrow WWE bullshit, right? And this is bad. Like, this is really freaking bad. The Department of Education, these positions that get filled by lifelong bureaucrats who suck, and the organizations themselves are inefficient, and they suck, and they're using taxpayer dollars and American wealth, and they're corrupt. They're all bad things, and all Joe Biden's appointments were horrible, and the people that run them, I don't know who they were, but at least they're part of this debacle. And bringing in outsiders that don't know anything about the agency and how it works and any of these things. Plus, she's really old. Like, she can't be functioning that well. She was old in the documentary, and 10 years ago, like some of the videos. And so it isn't like she's some hotshot new person with creative ideas that, was pitching for this. It's like Trump has people, and he goes, all right, I'm going to give you a position. I don't know what it is. What do you want? I don't know what's left open. I don't know, Department of Education? Yeah, I'll do that. It's like that fucking conversation. Like, isn't like anybody thought, oh, I hope he puts Linda McMahon in charge of education. She has nothing to do with that, right? The people he's appointing, many of them have multiple skeletons in their closet. They're probably not going to get passed through. But if they do, they're going to be a disaster. And not that these agencies are efficient and good. Let's say the agency's 30% efficient. 70% of the agency's waste. When he puts these people in, it's going to get worse and get more corrupt and whatever. Like, God knows what Trump's going to do to all these agencies. But they are responsible for some part of our society. And education is really bad, right, in our system. And it's going to get much worse. And, it's just, it's funny, but it's really bad. Like, Trump's a freaking nightmare.
Maya, I was just looking at some of the sort of final polls, and it turns out this was, as David Plouffe predicted, about a 1 to 2 point race. There was a theory that women would reject Donald Trump in numbers to fuel Kamala Harris's victory across the swing states. That didn't happen, largely because of white women. Why do you think that was?
So Donald Trump made historic gains in the black community and the Hispanic community among young people. So young people didn't turn out for Kamala Harris. Some of that had to do with her issue with the Vietnam stuff. Some of that had to do with Trump going on these podcasts, right? And this disgruntled nature of young men who are being ostracized by the Democratic Party, which I've documented through that good CNN report, right? And so putting this on white women is not factually accurate because Kamala didn't do as well amongst people of color and Hispanic people and young people as Joe Biden did and certainly Obama did, right? So that's one of the reasons she lost, because she didn't do well in other groups. And so to say that she lost because of white women is just a debunked theory, right? But this is what they're doing here.
Well, I want to reframe it just one little bit. We have long had a problem in this country of whether people vote their interests or vote their race. And identity politics is not the issue unless we're talking about whether people are voting for themselves or voting for their race. And that's what happened in some of these instances of voters.
Okay, so think about what's being said here. Like, they're complaining, these two people, about white people just voting for someone who's white over their own interest in white women, because Kamala Harris was the candidate for women, because she wants to push for women being able to murder their fetuses, mothers. And, again, this is a crime against women and motherhood. I mean, it's a spiritual crime, as, all of those things that I've talked about before. But the difference here is, or what they're saying is, women had a choice to vote for another woman or vote for a white person if they were white, and they chose to vote their color instead of their gender, which is identity politics. You guys were hoping women would vote for their what they consider their liberal woman feminist rights, and many women don't agree with that, right? Especially these conservatives type in the middle, so of these swing states, these people are neither Democrats or Republicans, and many of them are very conservative. And so to frame it like they betrayed their gender over their race is silly. Like, people will vote for people that look like them. That's true, right? And that's the majority of people are white in this country. And so, like, that's an issue you have to deal with. And so when you run a woman of color, you know, running a candidate of color is one thing, but running a woman is another thing. And so, like, they were looking for a breakthrough candidate, and Kamala Harris was horrible and nobody really liked her. And that was the other reason. And there's real policies issues and things that people were upset about. And so they're saying that these women betrayed their gender, white women, as they chose Trump and voted him just because he was white, and that's not the case. I mean, it might be the case in some of the, you know, a few of the people, but it wasn't their only reason, because, you know, they voted for Obama, many of these. I mean, Obama won these states when he ran, and that wasn't about race, it wasn't about gender, but it was about, you know, they got over their racial issues. So, you know, this is just silly. Like, it's just a silly way to look at it. It's not accurate.
But the other thing we have to remember is we have a lot more work we could have done and need to do and invest in communities in all over this country so that people actually show up to vote, because we didn't see the level of turnout we could have and should have. That would have been women and people of color and people all over this country that would have come out for a better set of principles and values.
So you said you don't want to play identity politics, but then you're saying that if you got more people of color who would have voted for the person of color, and if you got more women who would have voted for the person who was a woman, right? Like, you're criticizing white women for voting for a white guy, but you're saying that, you know, people of color and women should vote for a woman, you know, should have voted for Kamala, just based in identity politics. Like, it's just so, I mean, it's so obviously, I mean, the hypocrisy is just so obvious, right? She's talking about identity politics and claiming that they're against identity politics.
Because at the end of the day, what we know is that we share and agree more on policy than we realize, unless the person at the top of the ticket doesn't look the same.
Yeah, some of that exists, of course, but it didn't exist with Obama in these very same states. Like, Obama won many of these states, these swing states, right? But you expect people of color to fall in line and vote for Kamala and turn out, and they didn't. They voted for Joe Biden over Kamala Harris. Joe Biden had more enthusiasm from people of color than Kamala Harris. So you had an issue with your fucking candidate, right? Like, she couldn't even turn out her own identity politics. I mean, because many people questioned what her, you know, like, how real she was about any of that stuff. And she just sucked. And so, like, these things are just silly. Like, it's, you know, admit that wokeness and, you know, the Biden administration failed, just like Trump failed before. And Trump will fail again. Like, you're both failures. It's just the failure du jour, right?
Because at the end of the day, what we know is that we share and agree more on policy than we realize, unless the person at the top of the ticket doesn't look the same. And that we have to solve.
So I played that whole thing again because I wanted to get to the part I left off the part I want to talk about, which is that we have to solve. What do you mean we have to solve it? You mean other people have to give up their prejudice, but you guys are going to push for, you know, the way that they frame these platforms. I mean, we saw this, you know, there's a good piece from CNN that I showed you, that the guy, Smear Kaddish. You had that guy out there about how men are being excluded and are being demonized all the time. And the Democrats had a 16, you know, group of people that said, this is the groups that we serve. Start off with women, and went through these various groups, LGBTQ groups, and, you know, people of color, Hispanics, black people, these things, and left off men, right? Left off men, and specifically white men, because, you know, this is why they tried to bring in Walls, and, you know, I want to check in on Gwen Walls at some point, see what she's up to. Probably not anything. There's probably nothing out there. They've disappeared them, but they turned out to be more liberal than Kamala, and they're trying to bring in, you know, like these kind of white guys, but they left white guys off the list because, like, different men of color and things would have been included. Gay men and men of color, Hispanic men and things like this, were included on the list. They just didn't say the word men, but they had somehow made it on the list. But the one group that didn't, because they didn't specify men in general, was white men, right? And so you've excluded a group, so don't be bummed out if they don't vote for you. Like if you do all these policies that are going to push for the woke agenda, it's going to push for trans agenda, these things, the gender stuff, it's going to push for all these types of things that other people don't find in their interests, they're not going to vote for you, right? They're picking, groups to appease to, just like the Republicans have groups that they're trying to appease. And so, like, this is just silly. Like, it's immature. Like, we all know how politics fucking works. You guys are supposed to be experts, right?
And I just want to say this one last thing. We don't take laying down what any Republican senators want to do to roll over to hold on to political power, because the issue is the policies we agree on, and that is that we should all be safe. And we're not going to allow anybody to tell us 1% of the U.S. population, transgender people, are somehow our biggest danger when it comes to sexual violence.
So there was a transgender woman in the Senate, and they're not letting her use the men's room or the ladies' room. And they covered that before. But they don't realize they've lost on that issue. That one commercial was so damning. I played the commercial. I knew this was going to resonate with people. And Trump, he failed in 2016 to address this, but they did a good job for their particular, outrage and their bullshit, because it was a bullshit commercial, because Trump doesn't really believe the things that were said in that commercial. But it was what the American people feel. And you guys have overstepped, right? You've done things that have pissed off the majority of people, backing something, and you went too far, like way too far, changing all these things that people don't agree with. And the American people said, we don't agree with it. You said, fuck you, we know more. And now it's coming back to haunt you.
Yeah, it's such an important point. To be continued. John Howman, thank you for keeping it real. Charlie Sykes, Maya Wiley, who always keep it real.
Is that what we just witnessed? These guys keeping it real? I mean, there's a bunch of bullshit. That wasn't just what she just said. But, like, none of that was real. Like, what are you talking about? Keeping it real? You guys are keeping it real. Way to keep it real. Thanks for coming on here and keeping it real. Like, it's just so pathetic. You guys, just haven't learned a thing, right? And the major thing here is that you guys are full of shit. And the American people know it. And they're not watching you anymore, and you have no influence. And you're not keeping it real because you're pretending like that doesn't exist. You're pretending your words matter and that people are going to be swayed by that. And again, this is all opinion-based shit, right? Like, we're all verbalizing our opinions, and your guys' opinions, even though you got backing, like, people are paying you to give your opinions, like corporations and, government shills and all these news agencies are paying you to give your opinions, and you have a huge platform of cable TV and, even on the internet and all over the place. And you have a competitive advantage to all of us who have no budget, no staff, no brand recognition, no official. We're not official either. You guys are official. You're the official experts. And people are like, fuck you guys. We don't want to listen to you anymore. You guys suck. And they keep on telling you over and over again. And you keep on pretending like that's not being said back to you. Like, they should have hecklers in their studio. And when they put on their fancy clothes and their suits and they come in with their fancy opinions and their, educated opinions, and where they're always wrong, they're wrong constantly, they should have people in there heckling them and saying these things that I'm saying, right? And, talking about how they're compromised. Well, somebody yelling, hey, does that come from you, or did your Pfizer handlers tell you to say that, right? Things like that, heckling like that, right? And just reminding everybody in the audience that, like, they've lost it. They don't have an audience anymore. And all the people that are there are like, almost practically brain dead boomers and older folks who are, people are even older than boomers who are, the Joe Biden era people who have, this is what they're used to, this kind of crap, even though it's not the same news that they used to watch, right? And even some of those people have left to find better, more realistic opinions on the internet. It's all opinions, and out of all the opinions, theirs suck the worst. Okay, so Pete Hegseth, who was married, Hegseth lawyer says settlement paid to sexual assault accuser was due to extortion. And so this is that video from CBS News. Well, here's his wife's Instagool. I think those are Trump, or those Trump sneakers. So from November 6th, and there they are together. So he's married, and happy anniversary to my favorite person on this planet. I love you, Pete Hegseth said to his wife. But he banged this other woman, apparently, who accused him of sexual assault. And so let's go to that video here. So his lawyer talks to this woman.
Maintains that Hegseth is innocent and that this sexual encounter with an unidentified woman was consensual, but what he...
But, he's married, so that would be enough, right? When I grew up, I mean, this guy would never be nominated. I mean, they had, like, real people back then. Not that the system was great. It was the beginning of what it is now, right? But a guy cheating on his wife and then paying off his mistress, that, like, they're making that sound like that's okay. And this is for Trump, it is, and certainly for Americans. But he, whether he assaulted this woman or not, he was cheating on his wife and was, all these things. There's just something seedy about this, right?
He also told me is that Hegseth did make a confidential financial settlement with this woman, that they didn't want the story to come out because they were worried the allegations would cause Hegseth to be fired from his job at Fox News.
Okay, so if he was going to be fired for his job at Fox News, he shouldn't get promoted now that the story has come out to be defense secretary. If there's a sexual scandal, this was during the Me Too time or whatever was going on here. So, all of these things, right? And if this is, I would assume he was married at the time. I don't know. I think he said maybe 3 wives. I don't know. The guy have some issues with women. But, if they're going to fire you at Fox News for something that happened or an accusation that was there, then, and you're making payments for someone who's, whatever she is, right? That's not a guy who should be in charge of your Defense Department, especially since he has no real experience, right? And so, Trump is just a drama king because he could get pieces of shit like this in who aren't going to be as controversial. Like he's picking people who are not insiders and not, aware of the job that they're doing. They don't know where they're getting themselves into. They don't understand. Like this guy is a person who has opinions of how the military is run, but he was in the National Guard. He wasn't even in the real military, like the real branches of the military. The National Guard is, I'm not saying like it's worthless, but it's not the same. It's not the same level, and it's a part-time gig. And he ended up going to Afghanistan or some of these places, whatever, as a National Guard support person. So I don't even know what his role was, but it certainly didn't prepare him to be in charge of the Defense Department. And he's got scandals and shit, right? And paying off his former lovers like Trump did with Stormy Daniels. And that shows you how degraded our system is, that he's saying, well, they didn't do the really bad thing that they're accusing of him, but he did all the other things and he paid her off. And so it's a legitimate scandal, but still it just shouldn't matter. He can do this job that's a promotion from the job he would have got fired for if he didn't pay her off. Like, it's so fucked up, right? So M. Night Shyamalan's film The Trap, it was a budget of $30 billion and it made $82 million worldwide. Like that, people saw the trailer. I don't know if it was a Taylor Swift part that appeals. I don't know who his audience are. His films have grossed $3.3 billion globally. So he's been awarded these things. He's won awards, nominated for some Academy Awards, some of these other things. And he's an absolute tack as a person there. It got, the critics kind of panned it. Only 58% thought it was, it was a horrible movie, right? And, they're rewarding him for, for putting out horrible content, right? They're just, and the nepotism with his daughter, and it says here somewhere, let me see if I can find it. Trap was inspired by a true story. Inspired by a true story, not based on one. Because it's not, like, so they make it sound like this thing had any relationship to reality. It had zero, like nothing about it was, like, it's just completely taking liberties with the way that reality works and the laws of physics. So the story was they had a lot of people with outstanding warrants. And this would be low-level criminals, right? People who, stupid criminals, maybe things that were, I don't know, parking ticket related, I don't know, things that the people had warrants. And to round them all up, they sent these people, that they had won, some sort of, they went on like a mailing list or something to all these people who had outstanding warrants and told them they had won tickets to a Philadelphia Eagles game. But they didn't go to the game itself. So it wasn't a concert, a pop concert that had anything to do with Taylor Swift. And it wasn't the actual game. They didn't give them tickets to the game. They told them they had to come to a certain place to pick the tickets up. And when the criminals came in, they had set up this whole series of rooms to process them. And, these criminals who had outstanding warrants. A lot of them were probably small, low-level criminals. And so it wasn't that there was a concert and they set up a trap to entrap some mastermind serial killer. It was a bunch of low-level, stupid criminals who, for whatever reason, bought into this idea that they were getting free Eagles tickets and went and got themselves caught in a sort of a, this like a dragnet. It's almost kind of like the opposite of it has nothing to do with his story. Like to say that it inspired his story, like they're two completely different things. One was a staged event that didn't involve really dangerous criminals, didn't involve serial killers, and if they were, they're really bad ones, that would lure into this place to get, arrested, instead of going out to each people's individual houses and finding them and arresting them. They brought them all there, and they guess saved some money. Whereas his movie was about this, dad who brings his daughter to a Taylor Swift-like concert. M. Night Shyamalan's daughter is getting a chance to be a Taylor Swift-like character in the movie so that she can, boost her career. And that they set up this, SWAT teams and all these, high-level or, militarized police to be out there to catch the serial killer in a sea of 12-year-old girls, right? Just a disastrous idea that no one would ever do, and then just all the plot holes that were from there. And so, this Trap was inspired by a true story. Like, it's just another one of the big lies. Like, it has nothing to, the two things have nothing to do with each other, right? Okay, so the Biden administration is compromised by the neocons he had to make a deal with to get rid of Trump, right? He had to make a deal with some of the Republican Party. And he did with the neocons, who had been disgraced and embarrassed, the Cheneys and all those fools and all those evil motherfuckers who, caused all those illegal wars. And they were disgraced and out of power. And they've always been wrong on everything, at least unless they're trying to create chaos and they're, everything that they've said, everything that they thought was going to happen has failed. And the wars failed and, maybe not for them because they made money on the, Halliburton made money for Dick Cheney and these other people. And they, absconded with money and they looted, they skimmed money laundering out of these projects. So they did well for themselves, and maybe that's what this is about as well. It is definitely for Biden, because Biden has a connection to the Ukraine. And so he's going out, and they know that this thing's over. And their theory, at least the one that they said publicly, was that they thought they could take down Russia and drain them and destroy them with the Ukrainian war, sort of like what happened with the Afghanistan war, right? And so here, live updates, Ukraine war, Kyiv launches U.S.-made missiles into Russia and also in British-made missiles. Ukraine fires British Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. So these long-range missiles that Biden had not let them fire, now they're firing. And, of course, Russia has brought in 100,000 or so of the North Korean troops, and they closed the American embassy. So the U.S. U.S. says, and Kyiv has closed down their embassy there because of threats and all these things, possibly to the American embassy. And so, in some ways, this is World War III has started. Putin is smart enough to realize once Biden's gone that they can, make a deal with Trump. And Trump's going to bail. He's not paying any more money to the Ukraine. Like, who knows what he's going to do, but that is what I think he's going to do. But, this is possibly the beginning of the end of, World War III. Once we're at war with Russia, it's only going to end one way, and that's nuclear war. And we're close to it, right? So, and Trump isn't up for the task or challenge. America's divided and really doesn't want to fight a war. And most Americans were against this Ukrainian bullshit in the first place. Certainly now they are. Americans are overwhelmingly against the Ukrainian war. Okay, so I'm going to use images of Trump's stuff from a previous video. Doesn't have to do anything to do with what I'm going to talk about here. I want to talk about destiny. I want to talk about, I just watched that Boston Red Sox Yankees, the 7-game series comeback, the 4 games in a row. And weave it into this stuff about World War III, right? And so when you think about World War III and what was World War II and World War I. So in World War I, there was around 16.5 million people who died worldwide. It says the number of military and civilian casualties in World War I was about 400 million. Estimates range from around 15 to 22 million deaths and about 23 million wounded military personnel and also wounded civilians, right? And so then you think about all the peoples who's got bombed, their houses got bombed, right? They're just, all the people, the women who were R'd, if you ever see the movie Tank, where these guys are going through, Americans are going through, I think it's Germany with tanks, and they're just abusing the people. I mean, all the things that happens when militaries encounter civilians and, stealing their food and all the suffering that people endured, the fear, the trauma, all these things, right? The survivors of traumatic situations in war. We're talking about quite a number of people, the people who suffered from mustard gas, right? So they said 75 million people died in World War II, including 20 million military personnel, 40 million civilians, many of whom died because of deliberate genocide, massacres, mass bombings, diseases, and starvation, right? So then there's all this suffering that people can't get food and their systems collapsed. The Americans really put a hurting on Germany by bombing rail lines. Like they started to bomb all the ways that, roads and bridges and things. We see this now, and they couldn't get access to people, couldn't get access to food, and, just destroyed the infrastructure of the country after the war was already kind of over. And so, shit like that happens, right? And so if you think about the suffering of hundreds of millions of people in these wars, and then the suffering of people all the time, and the death and suffering of people, and you think these wars were decided by just one or two people, like decided by Hitler, like in World War II, or just you go back to, you find out about these wars, and it's like one guy, like there's some arch, duke or something, and, World War I, for whatever that story was, or this case between Biden and Putin and Zelensky and these people, they're deciding, the fate and the future of so many people that have died. All the people have died in the Ukraine war. All the people are suffering. The things that happen that cause mass suffering, it's only one guy. It's only a few people, like 10 people or a handful of people or the powers that be that are making up these decisions. And we have zero say in it. Like we're not a part of it. Like our our souls are just, we have no bearing on whether there's a war or not. These are human choices, right? That's what I'm getting at. These are human choices, and they're not human choices. They're going to fucking happen, right? And the reasons wars happen is hatred and anger and fear, but mostly hatred. And when the energetic condition, like something like hatred, boils over, and you see it happen in America, the levels of hate, it goes into the atmosphere and it needs a response. When you're a hateful person, you're going to get hate in return. It's just how it works. If you're hating all the time, if you're a loving person, you're going to get love in return. And so a hateful person is generating bad energy for themselves in the future. And when collectively people are meditating on hate and anger and fear, it creates diseases and suffering and war and these things, right? It creates responses. And what do you think those responses are? What do you think the responses to something like hate is? And so when the world is filled with just despair and hatred and negativity, it generates these types of events, right? Big cataclysmic events, whether they're man-made events or they're by nature, these things just happen. And I say this over and over again, either there's a plan or there's not a plan. If there is a plan, then the plan is comprehensive and it's a plan. Like it's not a plan. Like if there's divine consciousness, if there's consciousness in overseeing the universe, or it's random and chaotic, like which is it? Each person has to understand this. There's destiny. That there's a plan here. Like, is there a plan or is there chaos? Is there consciousness or is it just random? Like each person has to kind of figure that out for themselves. And if you look into it in like a spiritual way, an etheric way, and you'll see the plan everywhere. And you wouldn't be able to see that if it was chaotic. There wouldn't be signs for you to see. There wouldn't be, and not to go with the M. Night Shyamalan movie Signs, which was a theme of that movie, but there would be things that you would see that would confirm that there's a plan and there's consciousness. And you see it all the time, and you just start seeing it, and it doesn't happen randomly. Like it just wouldn't be, random. Like I will have a thought about something. I cover this all the time, and then, some obscure thing from my past, and there'll be some sort of confirmation for it, right? Just yesterday, I was looking up, something that would ended up being the answer was coconut oil, health-related issues, right? And I, went to talk to my wife, and I said, looks like coconut oil is the best solution to whatever we were dealing with, health-wise. And I went on Facebook, which I almost never do. And right up top, somebody said, it must be winter. They post a little meme. It must be winter. My coconut oil has solidified. I mean, when's the last time I thought about coconut oil and I saw something about coconut oil? But I did some research and I looked at the various options and I just settled on coconut oil and I ordered some. And just right after that, like right after I ordered it, somehow I ended up on Facebook, which almost like never happens. Like I said, I go there maybe once. I mean, I look at messages on Facebook, but even my Pockets of the Future, I'm not even attending to those messages like I used to. I'm not getting to messages as soon as possible, even on Instagram. I'm not getting to comments, like even though I'm producing all this content, I've been slow to do those other things for whatever reason. Like you've just gone through that phase. And I very seldom scroll through Facebook, even just a little bit, because I don't see what my friends post. My friends don't even post anything. Most people don't post shit anymore on Facebook. Like Facebook is no longer what it used to be. And it's mostly ads, right? Or paid content. And so like 50% of Facebook is sponsored stuff, or at least when I look at it, very little of it is from people who are so-called my friends. And most of those people I don't even know, and the truthers aren't even there anymore. And the heartfulness people I banned, so I unfriended. And so like it's just not really anything for me to look at. I used to find ideas, there used to be truthers who used to post a lot of shit on Facebook, but Facebook excluded those people. And now Facebook is, allowing people to post more stuff, but those people have moved on to different platforms, right? Because, Facebook sucks. So, Facebook is kind of dead. But here it is, this coconut oil thing. And how could that happen over and over again chaotically? Like just out of chaos, there would be two things that would just be coincidentally there together. That I would think about something I haven't thought about in years, and then all of a sudden the movie that I thought about or a reference to something would be in a movie or TV show. My wife and I were talking about something, and then we watched something that night or the next day, and it references something we were talking about in an obscure way. Like, how could that be? It couldn't be. It couldn't be random. It couldn't be chaotic. Again, I'm not trying to convince you, but for me, and there's so many other things that have convinced me that there's order to the universe. And so that means that things are happening are supposed to happen beyond anybody's fucking control. It isn't a person deciding it. It isn't one person. If we go to World War III, it isn't going to be Trump or Biden or any of these things. Alex Jones, he, I looked at his Twitter feed when this whole thing happened with Infowars, and now Twitter has been recommending me Alex Jones stuff, and it's all about World War III. And he's always hitting the fear button, panic, and he's saying we should impeach Biden and put Kamala Harris in there to avoid World War III. And none of these things are preventable. If they're destined to happen, they're going to happen. And certainly World War III appears to be destined to happen, right? And I can say this about the Red Sox, in 2003, I guess it was 2004, in 2003, they hired this guy, Theo Epstein. If you saw the movie Moneyball, which is a great movie, that's about this guy, Billy Beane. And they referenced this in the beginning of the documentary on Netflix. And Billy Beane hired this guy who was, doing the analytics. And they started to run baseball through analytics, which they now do with basketball. And analytics has helped tremendously in the efficiency of these sports, these games and things, right? Because it's just there in the math. And they were going to hire Billy Beane, and they had Theo Epstein, this young guy who was an unproven executive. But Billy Beane decided that he didn't want to be that far away from his daughter. He was living in Oakland. So he decided not to do the job. And they hired Theo Epstein, who put in these analytics, and the Red Sox finally want to throw off this curse of when they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees, and the Yankees went on to flourish, and the Red Sox, would now you weren't. And I lived right there in that area for most of my life. I had people who were either Red Sox fans or Yankees fans. We were 2 hours away from New York City and 2 hours away from Boston. And so those were the two big cities. Hartford, we had the frickin' Whalers, which was the worst name. We were the Hartford Whalers, so not we, but the city was. And they had a really bad hockey team that was low budget and made it to the playoffs like once in 20 years, and now I think they're the Carolina Panthers, or they don't exist at all. I'm not sure. They either moved to somewhere else, or whatever it is. Hartford doesn't have a professional team because it's too small. And, people lived in Hartford and Hartford area would usually root for either New York teams or Boston teams. And the Patriots sucked, and, the Celtics were good, but the Red Sox had this, horrific history. The Jets and the Giants sucked for most of that time. Later on, they got better, at least the Giants. And they won a Super Bowl, a couple Super Bowls. They had Lawrence Taylor and all that stuff, Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells. But the Yankees were great, and my brother loved the Yankees. And there was a time where the Yankees were behind the Red Sox by 11 games, and it was going into like September or something, August, September. And they started to catch up, and they were down by like 3 games. And they went to Boston to play a 3-game series. And the Yankees swept them. It was called the Boston Massacre or something like this. Kind of only barely remembered it. And my brother would talk shit to all his Red Sox, friends, these things, right? It was a big thing there. And the Red Sox fans loved to lament all the curse and the history and the bad luck and all the things that happened to them over and over again. They ran that guy Bucky Dent out of town, even though he let a routine ground ball slide through his legs, even though there was more people involved in that meltdown. They were about to close out the Mets to win a World Series. But it set up this epic story where they went down to the Yankees 3-0, in the history of sports, and particularly baseball, no one has ever come back from that, and the Red Sox did. And I was looking at there's a lot of information, and I watched this. Like it was a time where I was in chaos in my personal life. I was married to a person who had, at least in her story, was severely sexually abused and emotionally abused by her mom and her dad, and had all these, mental issues, suicide attempts, self-harm, and, had a good side and was like someone who'd done well academically, at top of her class, these things, but just was a kind of a failure, and, was just had all this brokenness from her situation, and someone who was a victim, all these things. I've talked about this in the Journey series. And we had 4 kids together, and one was born in 1998, another one in 1999 on consecutive Mother's Day. A third child was born in 2000 in July. The other 2 were born in May. And then the final kid, my son, who still lives with me, and he was born in 2002. And he was also born in May. And so around that time, we were living in an apartment that was cockroach infested above some dryers, a laundry room in a college apartment. I was working in a treatment center for sex offenders, teenage sex offenders, and it was hell. It was a really bad time. And my family and I then moved down south to Virginia, and then some other, we moved to various places there. And during that time is when this Red Sox thing happened. And it was a bad time, chaotic, it was just a very stressful time in my life, 18 years of stress, but, that specific time. And we didn't have a TV, and I didn't watch a lot of TV, and I really wasn't on the internet all that much, but I somehow watched this thing with the Red Sox and Yankees because it was really interesting. And so I didn't know all the information they presented in the documentary. But if you look at all this stuff, if you end up watching it, it's on Netflix, like it's interesting from the standpoint of all the things that had to happen and all the things that led up to this epic comeback. And, they pissed off long-term players. They tried to trade players. I didn't even know they tried to trade for Alex Rodriguez. And it fell through, and this guy, no ma. That's what they say in Boston. No ma. No ma. And so he was a fan favorite, but he got disgruntled, and they traded him and all these things. And, I was unaware of these things, like all the details that went into it. But it clearly was meant to happen. It was this epic, so much that they're making a documentary about it. This epic event in sports history, and the curse and the stuff between the Red Sox and the Yankees, and, the Red Sox Nation that came out of that, and all this stuff, right? And it's beyond the people that were there, and, the plays that were made, and, some of these things just come down to luck. You could say it's rigged and staged, but some of it comes down to luck. And there were some lucky things that happened. Sometimes it comes down to like one key play or one key mistake, which happens over and over again. And you blame the people who make the mistake and all these things. But a lot of this stuff is destiny, whether it's rigged or not even, right? A lot of life is just, it's rigged by the divine system because things are supposed to happen a certain way, and there's a framework for it, just like within a video game. And we can make decisions within that framework, but whatever's going to happen is going to fucking happen. And I've seen this over and over again. It's not, one person's mistake or one, everyone wants to point the fingers. But collectively, we are creating World War III right now. If it's going to happen, we've been creating it for some time, and all of us are a part of it. And that's why a lot of us will suffer because of it, right? Because it's not like the suffering is, this massive suffering because a few assholes made some bad decisions. This is a long time running with the atomic power and all these things, nuclear weapons and geopolitical dynamics and things, and the way people have been, and that the things that are going to happen they're already done. They're already predestined. And I know this, from just the understanding of the idea of a plan, that there's some framework and like this kind of templates that are rolled out, and we're all fitting into those narratives, and we're making our own personal decisions and our own attitudes, and which affect us in our relationships, right? If you look at life that way, then the person you're married to, whether you're getting along or you don't like that person or not, you are destined to marry. So you might as well make the fucking best of it, right? Your kids who you don't like or don't like you, or or whatever tragedies that befall them or you, people in your life, and all the things that happen. If you look at it as being part of a plan, you can't change the big things, but you could make the things better by like having an attitude, like being grateful, for example, right? Having gratitude as being your signature, emotion or signature, way to view these things. Being grateful for them, like being grateful for the things that are going to happen anyway, is the best way to go about it, because you can't change those things, but you can change the way that you interpret those things, right? And so, like, this is, this is what people have to kind of gravitate to, and they just won't, right? People just want to blame, and everyone wants to be negative and say, no, it's this guy, Democrats, this, Republicans, whatever. Yeah, sure. Okay, that's what gets you by, but it's not truth, right? Like, the things that are going to happen are beyond anybody's control. Even the people they call the controllers, in fact, they're the least, they have the least ability to manifest things. If the people that are in control of the system are disconnected from God and are going on a demonic path, and they're going against the divine will, which they are, then how can they manifest things, right? Like, to manifest things, you have to be congruent, and you have to have a connection to your, to your soul and these things. So they need the collective. They need all of us to manifest things, because they've lost the ability, because they're bankrupt inside. They have nothing to grab onto. They're not creative. They don't have creative energy, and they've gone to the dark side. So they don't have the ability to make dark things happen. So they have to use other people's creative force and ability to manifest things to manifest what's ever happening. And so they're certainly not responsible for it. And people being compromised and duped is probably, like a big part of that, like the biggest part of manifesting these things. But most of it has to do with things just have to happen because they're supposed to happen. And maybe there's some choices along the way, but they're collective choices that build up over time. And they're the direction that humanity's going, and we're going in the wrong fucking direction, right? Anybody can see it. And so blaming the deep state or blaming this or that, just fucking silly and immature, and just, it goes against the idea that you believe in God. Because if you believe in God, then God must have some influence over what the fuck's happening, right? Like, God isn't so stupid to make a plan where there's no contingency for people misusing their ability to choose and do freedom of choice type things. And so there must be something, there must be some structure to what's going on. And there must be some beings that are overseeing all this to make sure that the divine plan is orchestrated and going in the way it's supposed to. You can't just leave it randomly unchecked and without any sort of oversight. There has to be oversight. So there has to be beings that do that oversight. When people talk about angels or whatever it is, etheric beings that are looking after saintly people, that are looking after the trajectory of the divine plan, and make sure that with all the freedom of choice people have and all the mistakes they make and all their, you're prone to addictions and negative things and whatever, that it doesn't go off the rails. That, like, you think this is the first time this has happened, right? If the first time a species has done what we're doing, of course not. Like, this has to happen because people have egos and they have, the ability to choose things. And so, this is, again, part of a plan, because if God is overseeing everything and there's a plan, then this is, giving people freedom of choice. Some of this is what's supposed to happen, right? Like, what happens when you give people freedom of choice, and how they come around to eventually relinquishing that freedom of choice and only doing what their soul and God wants them to do. Like, something has to happen to make them realize misuse of their freedom of choice is a problem, and that, contingencies and things that are there to show them that this has to change, and they have to change and adapt to a more divine, following a divine path, and, surrendering some of these choices to do the wrong thing. So anyways, I just wanted to add this to this video. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paravano, definitely points for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.